Hey everybody, welcome to another edition of Power Core Productions and Podcastings. I'm your host, Jerron Harrington, back to here to another video. And today, we're going to be continuing our What If Naruto Was Trained by Dr. Strange, Naruto Mystic Adventures Part 4. As always, before we get into today's video, I want to say thank you to everyone who supports Power Core Productions and Podcastings. I cannot do it without you. You make the channel grow, you make the core grow. If you haven't already, please check out our previous uploads from earlier in the week, including yesterday's video for Darling in the Franxx Lionhearted, the Darling in the Franxx Voltron Legendary Defender crossover, as well as the opening for a new series that we are going to be introducing to this channel also, and that is going to be High School DxD Spirit of Vengeance, and this is going to be a High School DxD Marvel crossover with none other than the legendary Spirit of Vengeance himself, Ghost Rider. See what would happen if Issei Hyodo, on the day that he died, instead of being reborn directly into the House of Gremory and inheriting the boosted gear, what if instead Issei inherited the Spirit of Vengeance and became the Black Angel? But that's everything else that we're going to be having on the channel coming out soon, so I do hope you'll stay tuned for that also. And make sure you watch that community tab like a hawk so that you can always stay up to date on any news and changes that comes to Power Core Productions and Podcastings. But anyway, without further ado, we're going to get straight into today's video. So as always, sit back, relax, and enjoy the show. Following the Land of Waves, much had changed for Naruto, as well as the other members of Team 7. For all of them, they knew that despite their victories, they still needed to train and get much stronger to be prepared for the next mission and the next enemies that they would have to face. It had been well over a month, and Naruto hadn't seen or heard from Haku or Zabuza in the meantime. Kakashi would assure him that they were undergoing a certain screening process for those who would be defecting from one village to another. You never could be too careful, and while Kakashi did have faith in them, there were still precautions that had to be taken at all times. As such, Naruto felt as though something were missing. He couldn't really explain it, but there was just a certain feeling he got whenever he was around Haku. She was someone that understood him in a way that no one else really did. And for the other members of the team, they could tell that he missed her a lot, but they didn't tease him about it, as they had their own issues to worry about. Sasuke was throwing himself into his training non-stop, day in and day out. That mission showed one thing, that Naruto was growing in power, and if he didn't improve soon, he might get left behind. Sasuke continued to focus on improving his Sharingan, as well as his other abilities. The overdrive was proving to be very effective. It didn't take long for him to activate the lightning style overdrive level 2, a form of a lightning style cloak, if you will. It's nothing akin to the ones that were used in the Hidden Cloud Village, that were a purely lightning-based attack, in which the body entirely was covered in lightning-based chakra. This was sort of like the offshoot version, but the increase in power was definitely significant, and it was something that Sasuke could make his own. But as for Sakura, she also wanted to improve in her training some more. And so, whenever she wasn't doing team training, she would tag along with Naruto for meditating sessions, as well as learning how to control her magical constructs better. But for Naruto, While he tried to help her in every way that he could, and she was making progress, thankfully, Naruto was given some books and scrolls from Dr. Strange and Wong the last time that they had seen one another, before he had become a genin. These were the books that Strange and Wong believed were safe enough for Naruto to have. They gave advice for different ways of using magic, and there were some spells in there that could be useful. Naruto didn't have the chance to read through it thoroughly. You could say it was a bit of a help book, and there were some other skills that he would wish to learn when he had the time for it. But he decided to put that on the back burner for now, helping Sakura improve in her magical skills. But as she continued to grow in her training, a few things became of note. For one, out of all of the ninja properties, ninjutsu, genjutsu, and taijutsu, Sakura became immensely talented with her genjutsu techniques, going as far as to learn the Hell Cherry Blossom Level 2 technique. But there was more to her genjutsu. It actually began when she was sparring with Naruto. She attempted to trap him in the genjutsu, and she did. Within the genjutsu realm, she and Naruto continued their fight, and Sakura attempted to use an exploding tag. It nicked Naruto in the arm, and it really hurt, but that was the sensation you got with a genjutsu. However, when the genjutsu was dispelled though, and Naruto and Sakura were back in the realm of mortal, Naruto could still feel that his arm was in pain, and as he looked towards, he could see that he had really been burnt, but he was trapped in the genjutsu. Now granted, genjutsu could usually be pretty strong in deceiving the various senses, but was it really that strong that it could turn illusion into reality? Kakashi was also taking note of this, as he could see an aura beginning to form around Sakura, the more she used her magic, along with her chakra. Such as with Naruto, all chakra appeared as the same color, the standard blue, but when Naruto used magic instead of chakra, his aura would take from a blue to an orange. However, for Sakura, when she went from chakra to her own form of magic, the aura didn't go to orange, the same way that Naruto's did. Instead, her color was something completely different. It was a deep, dark shade of red. A kind of scarlet, if you will. Naruto continued to read, hoping that he might find a reason for this. Whenever Sakura made magical constructs, the color was always this scarlet red, not the standard orange that he, Strange, and Wong used, along with many of the others who also used the Eldritch magic. The only time that he had ever heard of such a type of colorful magic being used was when someone was using another variant of it. But the only other variant that he had heard of was something called chaos magic. But how on earth could Sakura have gotten a hold of something like this? After all, Naruto was supposed to be the only one in this world who had any magical affiliation of any kind. Now granted, the line between magic and chakra was a very thin one. It wasn't that they were all too different, but you could say that they were different interpretations of using mystical energy. Think of it as a faucet. If chakra was cold water, then magic was warm water. Both were still water, just at different temperatures, and those different temperatures could have various results, depending on how they were used. At least, that's how Kakashi would like to think of it. In the meantime, the village was starting to become run with various shinobi from all around. Naruto meeting them firsthand, as one day, while he and Sakura were walking down an alley, they would come across Konohamaru, who was being held up by a taller shinobi, who wore the headband from the village hidden in the sand. Naruto would help get Konohamaru and the others to safety, before asking why they were here. Another girl beside the young sand shinobi would introduce themselves as Tamari and Kankuro. and they would apologize, stating that they were only there for the Chunin exams, and that it was coming up around this time of year. Another being would also introduce himself into the fray, this one being shorter than the other two, but the one that inspired the most fear. For Naruto, he could sense that there was something off about him. He couldn't quite name the feeling, but it was almost as if the two of them were the same. Sasuke would make his presence known as well, and the young red-haired boy with the gourd on his back would introduce himself as Gaara of the desert, and Naruto and Sasuke would introduce themselves as well. The tension was starting to grow between the three of them, each one knowing that the other was definitely hiding impressive power, and it felt as though it were only going to be but a matter of time before they would get to see what they were capable of. All the while, Kakashi would recommend his team for the upcoming Chunin exams, and before long, he had them well informed, telling them that it was their decision if they wanted to compete or not. It didn't take much for all of them to decide that they were going to go out there, everyone feeling even more motivated than ever to give it their all. For Naruto, it was a chance to show off his skills, to show what magic and ninjutsu could truly do together. Sakura felt as though she had been growing a lot in her abilities, and there was so much more she had to offer, and now she had a chance to prove herself. And for Sasuke, there was a burning question that he needed answered. Was he one of the best? Could he hang with some of the elite shinobi of the world? This was going to be his best chance to find out. And with that, Team 7 would agree to enter the Chunin exams. Eventually, the day would come for the first exam to take place. Team 7 headed to the testing hall where they were supposed to meet. As they arrived, they would see a crowd gathering together on one of the floors. While they were far off in the back, Sakura's head would start to hurt. Both Sasuke and Naruto would turn back towards her, checking on her and wondering if she were alright. Sakura said that she had a headache, but she couldn't tell why, until she looked up, and she could see that they weren't on the right floor. Both Sasuke and Naruto asked what she meant, but Sasuke caught on quickly. And while Naruto wasn't the most adept at genjutsu, the one thing that his magic was good for was that he had a better chance of dispelling it than he did before. Of course, it still needed work, but he was much better off than he was originally. However, Sakura could see as clear as day. They were supposed to be on the 3rd floor, and to everyone else it appeared that way. But Sakura could see that they were actually on the 2nd floor. And even more so, it looked like the two kids who were blocking their way to the entrance, they were actually the 2 guards from the village gate, Izumo and Kotetsu. Both Naruto and Sasuke would be wondering why on earth they were here. Why were they posing as Genin, and why weren't they being allowed on the floor? But for the main part, how was Sakura able to see through the genjutsu? Not dispel it, but actually see it with their eyes. Sasuke would remark that it was kind of like the Sharingan. The Sharingan had the ability to see through genjutsu. Was Sakura's eyes just that strong that she could see through it without the need for a dojutsu? But then Naruto would remark and remind them that the difference between magic and chakra wasn't all that different. And he would surmise that the more that Sakura practiced with magic, the more that it blurred those 2 lines for her. Her perception of magic was so powerful that it had an effect on how she perceived chakra. Not that it was on the same level to a Sharingan, but to a decent extent, Sakura could literally see through any form of genjutsu. You could say that in a way, Sakura had trained her eyes to be almost as good as the Sharingan, without actually having the Sharingan. And there was even a sparkle of red energy flowing through them. Sakura was both happy but a little concerned at the same time. I mean, she was happy that she was doing well, but she didn't think she had improved that much. And even more so, she wasn't sure of how she could use this power. Maybe she could train it and become even better at genjutsu. But then that left the other question. Why was Izumo and Kotetsu here? The more they stopped and thought about it, Sasuke would then realize that this was a way to weed out the weaklings. And then, the more they thought, it made a lot of sense that this would be the way to weed out those who weren't good enough to be here. The genjutsu was rather simple, and if the other combatants couldn't see through it, then there was no point in them even going on to the first exam in the first place. Once they realized this, they decided that they weren't going to tell everyone about it. Instead, they casually walked back outside. Once they were able to make sure that they were getting to the third floor, that's where they went. They would see that not everyone had filled up the room, but judging from everyone else inside, they were able to see through the trick firsthand. Now that they had done so, Sakura would go off to sit, trying to rest up a bit, as her head was still hurting a little. Both Naruto and Sasuke just eyeing out the room and seeing the competition. As time passed, a few others would trickle inside, including the other rookies from the academy. Eventually, all of the 9 rookies were together again, and it looked as though they had changed a lot from the last time they had seen one another. Ino was still fawning over Sasuke, and Sasuke didn't care very much, and Sakura got immensely jealous. Hinata stared off shyly, while Kiba tried to act like the top dog of the group. For Naruto, his demeanor towards them all, and their actions towards him, had changed a lot. No one was really down-talking Naruto or acting rude towards him, since his whole attitude had changed a lot over the last year or so. This was a lot due to the fact that Naruto trained with Dr. Strange, and he had become a lot better with social groups. As such, they were a lot more kinder when speaking towards him. Of course, Kiba was still a jerk, but that was just Kiba being Kiba. As the 9 talked among themselves, another group of shinobi would enter into the room. One boy in particular having eyes very similar to Hinata. He would walk to Sasuke and ask for his name, although Sasuke would smugly tell him that it was normally customary for someone to give their own name first. The dark-haired boy would grin as he introduced himself as Neji Hyuga, the Rookie of the Year prior to Sasuke. And Sasuke would remark that, all the same, what happened in the past really didn't matter here, now did it? The 2 rookies were sizing each other up, but then Neji would catch the attention of Naruto. Naruto, while he didn't get Rookie of the Year, was definitely in contention. After all, he was definitely the most improved, and word had gotten around about Naruto and his bizarre set of skills. Another boy with a bowl haircut and with thick eyebrows would introduce himself to Sakura. He wore a green tracksuit and he had his arms wrapped, along with wearing orange leg warmers. He revealed his name to be Rock Lee, and he thought Sakura was really cute, and he asked her out. Sakura immediately rejected this, as she didn't know the guy at all, and he seemed a bit creepy, and Lee was left a bit heartbroken. Neji would give one more look to the group, particularly at Hinata, before leaving. Not too long after, a taller boy with white hair and glasses would show up, warning them that they were kind of making a lot of enemies by being really loud. The boy would reveal his name to be Kabuto, and that he were here for his 7th attempt, revealing the ins and outs of the Chunin exams and how they were held twice a year, and that this was his 7th try. He would also reveal another useful tool that he had in his arsenal, something that he called Ninja Info Cards. With the information he was able to gather on as many of the combatants as he could here, even on them. He asked if anyone in particular wanted to use the cards. Sasuke stepping up immediately. He had 3 names in mind: Neji Hyuga, Rock Lee, and Gaara of the desert. Kabuto would get the information for Sasuke, and they were all able to see what they were up against. They also learned about a new village that no one knew much about, and how they had sent a team here this year round, the ones from the Sound Village. Unknown to the group, the Sound Shinobi actually heard that comment, and they attempted to make an example out of Kabuto, but they were quickly stopped when Naruto got between them. Before any fighting could go on, a puff of smoke would appear in front of the classroom, as a man in a dark trench coat, wearing a bandana, would reveal himself, along with the other proctors. Naruto recognized the man from the gate when Zabuza and Haku were picked up. The man would introduce himself as Ibiki Marino, and he would be the proctor for the first test, which was going to be a written exam. The rules would still be the same as in canon, but in this scenario, Naruto, in terms of his smarts, would be a bit more improved. Not enough to answer these questions though, far from it, but he did have one trick up his sleeve when it came to cheating. You see, with Dr. Strange, there was one ability that Naruto was able to learn, one that was rather impressive, and one that could be useful in many regards. This technique was astral projection. Naruto's body would slump forward on his seat as the written test was underway. To the untrained eye, it looked as though Naruto were falling asleep, and others just shook their head, thinking that if someone was that lazy, then they were probably going to fail. But actually, the ghost-like body of Naruto would be hovering above the entire classroom, and absolutely no one could see him. Well, at least that's what he thought. When Sasuke started using his Sharingan and Neji his Byakugan, while they couldn't see it was Naruto, they could pick up a chakra signature floating around in the room, and their eyes followed it. For Sasuke, in the eye of perception, the silhouette of chakra slowly revealed itself to be Naruto of all people. But how on earth was Naruto doing this, Sasuke thought. It was like an orange apparition. He didn't know how, and he didn't know why, but he knew that was Naruto. Even Sakura could pick it up on a faint level. She couldn't see it, but she could feel Naruto's presence, as if it was leering over her somehow. Although when she turned her shoulder, no one was there at all. Thankfully, none of the other proctors could even remotely tell what Naruto was doing, so Naruto was able to cheat with no problem at all. Getting the answers that he needed, he would fill out his test before sitting down and waiting. Eventually, towards the end, the 10th question would be given. The question of whether to stay and fail and never become Chunin, or to leave and doom your other teammates to failure, but having the chance to come back again. All the same, Naruto was still determined to pass no matter what, and his determination to stay was the right answer to the 10th question. As such, he, along with the others who had managed to survive and stay on to this point, would pass and would move on to the second test. The second test that would be headed by the next proctor, who would come flying through the window. An older woman by the name of Anko. She would take them all to where the next site for the test would be held. This site would be known as the Forest of Death. For the remaining teams, they would be split up. Each team would be given a scroll. Half of the teams would be given an Earth Scroll, while the other half were given a Heaven Scroll. Their goals for this mission were simple. It was a team battle survival test. They had 5 days to get the other scroll that they were missing, 1 Heaven and 1 Earth Scroll, and they had to get to the tower within 5 days. There was no limit to the number of scrolls that they could take, just as long as they had a Heaven and an Earth Scroll. And there was also another rule, that they were not to peek into the scrolls under any circumstances. this was a way of showing that they could follow orders. Once all the teams were given their designated gate, they would wait for the start of the test. This would be signaled by a horn. As the horn went off, Team 7 would go dashing through the forest immediately. Naruto would channel the images of Icon to create as many solid clones as he could. He would send the clones out into different areas to scavenge and collect as many scrolls as possible, and to bring them back to them as soon as they could. It didn't take long for a few clones to come back. Once Naruto got the scrolls that they needed, he dispelled the other clones and they all pretty much disappeared wherever they were. Team 7 had at least 3 sets of the scrolls that they needed originally, and each of them agreed to carry one. Naruto would carry a set, Sasuke would carry a set, and Sakura would carry a set. With this, they felt as though they were making good time, and they would arrive to the tower within maybe a few hours. However, things took a turn for the worse. When out of nowhere, a large snake would swallow Naruto whole and go crashing down into the forest floor below. Both Sakura and Sasuke were absolutely stunned. They had no idea what had just happened to Naruto, or how on earth he had just been taken out by a large snake, but they would soon get their answer, as there would be a grass shinobi standing in front of them, and the smell of bloodlust was imminent. As Naruto fought to free himself from the belly of the snake, both Sakura and Sasuke would have to fend off against the grass ninja as best they could. Thankfully, their teamwork had improved from how much they had been able to train together, and Sakura was able to put some of her skills to good use. She would use her ability to create magical constructs, creating multiple shields blocking from attacks, covering both her and Sasuke, while Sasuke would take a chance to try out the overdrive level 2, as crackles of lightning would form around him. His speed would increase tenfold, as he became a flash of black and blue. His kicks and punches hit much harder, and the grass ninja complimented him on his skills, as he was actually able to land a few good hits. Sakura would create constructs of red crimson kunai, launching them from a distance. Her accuracy was decent, and she nicked the ninja a few times, but it was obvious she wasn't going to get any closer. But that wasn't the plan to. She used her distractions just long enough to cast her genjutsu. In the real world, Sakura had held the genjutsu for no more than 10 seconds, and even then, the strain that it put on her body was absolutely tremendous, even forcing her to bleed from her nose. But for the grass ninja, that 10 seconds felt like 10 hours of combat. And once she had freed herself, she complimented Sakura. But that power, that genjutsu, there was more to it. For when the grass ninja appeared, the injuries that she had sustained, however minor from the genjutsu world, had appeared on her body. It was as if it were real, as if all the damage that she had taken during that 10-hour span had really occurred. For Sasuke, he knew that they had to press the advantage, and that he needed to go all out for as long as he could. Thankfully, Naruto would arrive just in the nick of time, as both he and Sasuke, now feeling themselves being amped, would start to use their powers to the fullest extent. And for Naruto, this was the first time he came into contact with the beast. His eyes had turned completely red, as the feral form of the fox, its aura, began to circle around him. Naruto was now tapping into the power of the Nine Tails, and it was now being shown in his chakra, as his magic had increased by a great amount. He used the chains of Krakon to wrap and bind the shinobi in place, keeping the grass ninja attached to the tree, unable to escape. Once she was tied up, Naruto would then summon the winds of Watoon with even greater force than before, while Sasuke would use the Great Fireball Jutsu. The two attacks creating the scorching inferno of Wakon, and in doing so, the fiery heat would incinerate the tree completely, as a large explosion could be heard throughout the forest. For Naruto and Sasuke, they thought that they had gotten the win, but as they looked at the charred and burning bark, it seemed as though the grass ninja was beginning to shed its skin, as if it was beginning to change. Its voice would change from a feminine laugh to one that was dark and deep and foreboding, as now a new figure had revealed itself. The older man introduced himself as Lord Orochimaru, and he had to commend this team. Their teamwork, their power, their cohesion. It was absolutely wonderful. Even in his own mind, it reminded him a bit of his old team. In fact, this whole situation seemed pretty ironic, for it was long ago, during the events of the Second Great Ninja War, that three young shinobi, all promising in talent, had once had to take on the might of an even older shinobi, one by the name of Hanzo the Salamander. It was even in their defeat that they earned their famous name that lived on through history. And this team would become known as the legendary Sannin. But now, it was on the other foot. Orochimaru was now in the place of Hanzo, facing off against a team of bright and hopeful shinobi. But all the same, he had a mission to complete, and that was not going to be interrupted. He made quick work of Naruto. Naruto attempted to create multiple portals to distract and confuse Orochimaru, and for a while it worked. Naruto eventually creating a portal, he was able to get the team to safety, or so he thought. For just as it seemed as though they were out of harm's way, from out of the tree itself Orochimaru would appear, binding Naruto and holding him in place. He would hit him with the five-pronged seal, sealing away Naruto's Nine-Tails chakra, causing him to fall unconscious and pass out. And for Sasuke, he quickly stretched his neck and bit him on the shoulder, branding him with the curse mark and causing Sasuke to thrive in pain as he fell to the ground. Sakura was left all alone, but Orochimaru would leave her, believing that she had impressed enough, and he wanted to see more of what she could do. With that, Orochimaru would disappear into the darkness, and Sakura would be left alone to try to save her team. Sakura would find a small cave. Pulling both of her teammates inside, she would begin to treat their wounds and allow them a chance to recover. Outside of that, she would make sure to keep watch in case any enemies came close. And after some time, that was just what happened. As the Sound Ninja, who had been working under the order of Orochimaru, had come to seek out Sasuke, they were able to see through some of the traps that Sakura had set. But what they weren't prepared for was Sakura's abilities with magic. Sakura was able to create different magical constructs that caught the Sound Trio off guard. She was able to knock out Kin for a brief moment before turning to Zaku and Dosu. While she was able to fend them off respectively, she did get help in the aid of Rock Lee, who had come across her in her time of need, and together the two of them were able to hold off the Sound Ninja much better than in the original timeline. They did so to a degree that even for the others who had watched from a distance, that being Ino's team, they didn't feel the need to get involved, since Sakura was actually holding her own. And before long, Sasuke would awaken, along with Naruto, and together they were able to send the Sound Ninja packing. They would thank Lee for his help, and Lee would tell them that there was no problem at all, although Lee was definitely more interested in Sasuke than he was before. The level of power he was displaying, that was definitely worthy of a good fight. Once Team 7 were able to recollect themselves, they now had to worry about how they were going to get to the tower. But thankfully, they still had their sets of scrolls, so it was just a matter of getting there without being attacked. And that's when Naruto would come up with his own plan. He figured that judging from where they were only but halfway there, and that in maybe less than an hour or so, they would be where they needed to be. Naruto would create a clone, and give the clone the sling ring. The clone would be instructed to get to the tower as soon as possible, to not stop for anything, and to make sure it avoided combat. The clone would nod in understanding and would leave out immediately, as Team 7 waited. About an hour later, a portal would open up to the entranceway for the tower. The clone told them to hurry, and they quickly made their way through. The clone giving Naruto back the sling ring would disappear. They were still amazed that Naruto was able to do something like that, but all the same, they just needed to get to the tower. Once they made their way inside, they would open up one set of scrolls, and then in doing so, they would be met by Iruka Sensei, who was surprised to see they had made it there by the third day, with only 2 days left to spare. They would be told the importance of the Heaven and Earth scroll, of how they were the embodiments of improving mentally and physically, and how when both of those were achieved, one would gain the true enlightenment of a shinobi. Once they were done with their meeting with Iruka, the team quickly met with Kakashi. Kakashi took note of the curse mark on Sasuke's neck, and the team was rushed to a private meeting with the third Hokage, where they would explain everything that happened. At the behest of Anko, she wanted to have Sasuke removed and have him cancel from the Chunin exams, not knowing where Orochimaru might be. However, the third Hokage warned that might have played into his hands. So instead, they would simply have to be on high alert. As for Sasuke, the third Hokage would oversee the seal being placed on him by Kakashi, making sure that nothing else happened, and even reinforcing the seal so that it was strong enough. Sasuke would need a couple of days rest, but thankfully that would be enough time, and he would be able to come back for the next round. As for Naruto and Sakura, they would simply wait around in the lounging area, resting and recovering from their fights in the forest, as well as checking up on any wounds that they might have gained also. Before long, the other teams would eventually arrive, 7 in total for 21 combatants. The third Hokage was prepared to inform them of the next and third round. However, one of the support staff, one named Hayate Gecko, would have to alert the third Hokage that in the event of having this many combatants, then a preliminary round would need to be held, since the third round would be a spectacle of sorts, and they couldn't afford to have it drag on all day with so many matches. And as such, the preliminaries would need to be held, the first time in 5 years. Before it would begin though, the third Hokage would ask if anyone wanted to drop out, that now would be the time. And almost immediately, Kabuto would raise his hand. Naruto was a bit confused by this, but Kabuto would remark that he had been through a lot, and he just didn't feel he had it in him to keep going. While Naruto understood, he was still a bit skeptical. There was something about Kabuto that just didn't really seem right. You could call it a sixth sense if you will, but for Naruto, if there was one thing that he had learned from Strange, more than anything, something that Kakashi had always told them. It was that a ninja must see through deception. He couldn't call this deception per se, but there was definitely something about Kabuto that didn't seem right, although he couldn't quite put his fingers on it. But thankfully, that left them with 20 combatants, so there would only need to be 10 matches. For this part in the story, usually when I do a What If Naruto story, I like to have the chances of different matches put in the generator at random. Now, sometimes you might still get the same match that you got in the original, and other times you might get something completely different. For this part in the story, the 10 matches here were completely randomized ahead of time. While some of them did pop out the same, others popped out different. But let's get into this alternate what if. The first match would be Hinata Hyuga versus Neji Hyuga. The two Hyugas would square off, same as in canon. While Hinata would still be supported by some to continue, and while she would give it her all, Neji would ultimately get the win and advance to the final round. The second match, Rock Lee versus Yoroi. Yoroi's ability to absorb chakra puts him at a good advantage against someone who doesn't use ninjutsu or genjutsu, so Rock Lee would have to be careful. However, using his speed, he was more than fast enough to be able to take out Yoroi. A few crushing body blows and he was knocked out cold. Rock Lee advanced to the final round. The next match, Shino versus Shikamaru. Shikamaru's intellect was put on full display in this match, and he came up with some impressive strategies to keep Shino on his toes and to try to avoid his chakra-eating bugs. Ultimately, while Shikamaru was able to land a few decent hits, eventually he just decided to pull out. However, just because he pulled out of the preliminaries doesn't mean that his performance did not catch the attention of the third Hokage and the others. While they would have to wait, he was still in the recommendation to become Chunin, since his intellect was that impressive. The fourth match, Dosu versus Kiba with Akamaru. Kiba initially held the advantage with his attacks. Both he and Akamaru using the Man-Beast clone, they attempted to use the Fang over Fang to overwhelm Dosu. However, Dosu's abilities to control sound, especially with his sound amplifying gauntlet, would prove to be the downfall for both Kiba and Akamaru, as he was able to change the frequency and sound so high that their sensitive ears would be wrung. He would absolutely demolish them eventually, and he would get the win by technical knockout. Dosu would win and advance to the finals. Fifth match, Tamari versus Tenten. Tenten gets absolutely washed here. Nothing changes. Tamari advances to the finals. Next, sixth match, Kankuro versus Misumi. Same as in canon, Kankuro gets the win and advances to the finals. Seventh match, Naruto versus Choji. This would be a friendly exhibition between Naruto and Choji. While Choji would use the human bulldozer to try to run over Naruto multiple times, Naruto would effortlessly be able to evade many of Choji's attacks, and Naruto wouldn't have to use much of his magical abilities to defeat him. Naruto would be able to knock out Choji effectively, and Naruto would get the win. Eighth match, Sasuke versus Ino. This would be more of a comedy match than anything else. Sasuke wouldn't have to put in that much effort, and Ino would be swiftly defeated, and Sasuke would move on to the final round. Ninth match, Sakura versus Ken. A rematch from the Forest of Death, if you will. Ken would attempt to use her genjutsu, but Sakura would be able to see through it. She would effectively be able to defeat Ken using not only her ninja abilities, but also her ever-growing magical power. Sakura advances to the final round. The 10th and final match, Gaara versus Zaku. Even with Zaku's 2 broken arms, he would attempt to use his wind-like ability to slice through the sand. However, this would prove to be absolutely useless, and Gaara would crush him with the sand coffin, killing him and winning the match. And with that, Gaara would advance to the finals. With the 10 preliminary matches over, this would be the official bracket for the Chunin exams, as it will appear on your screen. The 10 remaining shinobi would each draw lots, each one being a number to determine where they would be seated in the bracket. With all 10 being able to compete, there was going to have to be a wildcard round. This would be 2 extra matches that would be fought in the tournament. This would reduce the number from 10 to 8, and once that was done, the official first round would begin. The wildcard matches would be as follows. Sasuke drew number 1, Shino drew number 2, Kankuro drew 3, Neji and Rock Lee drew 4 and 5 respectively. They would face off in the first wildcard match. The winner of this match would go on to face Sasuke in the first round. 6 would be Temari, 7 Naruto, 8 Gaara, 9 Sakura, 10 Dosu. Sakura and Dosu, 9 and 10 respectively, would fight in the second wildcard match. The winner of this match would advance to face Temari in the first round. For the day of the exams, the matches would begin as follows. The first 2 fights would be wildcard fights. This would determine who would advance to the first round tournament. After both wildcard matches, there would be a 15-minute intermission. After that, the first round would begin, with Sasuke facing either Neji or Rock Lee. The second match would be Shino versus Kankuro. The third match would be Temari versus the winner of Sakura versus Dosu. And the final match of the first round would be Naruto versus Gaara. The third Hokage would wish them well during their next month, giving them a chance to train, to learn new tricks, and to get ready for what was to come. With that, Kakashi would be proud of Team 7. Proud to see that all of his students had passed, and that they were all moving on to the final rounds of the Chunin exams. Of course, he was going to be training Sasuke during the next month, but he still had to find teachers for both Sakura and Naruto. For Naruto, he decided that he would have Ebisu look after him. Even though Naruto would have much rather just trained by himself, he decided to give it a chance and would meet with Ebisu Sensei. As for Sakura, she would be getting training by Kurenai. Kurenai would arrive to get Sakura, but as she did so, she would warn that her grandmother was stopping for a visit, and that she might be someone that Sakura might want to work with. Sakura wondered who Kurenai's grandmother could possibly be, and what she could have to offer in terms of training. But for Sakura, she was going to be in for a major surprise. Because you see, my fellow listeners, the multiverse is traveled by many people, many versions, if you will. Just because Doctor Strange had arrived in the Naruto world for the first time, that didn't mean that he was the first magic user to get there. Oh no. There was one other. She was not of this world, but the world she had come from, well, when she was younger, it was all but destroyed, and she needed a new place to start. About 50 years ago, she arrived to this world as a refugee. She met a young man who was a shinobi in Konoha. She took his last name, and together they started a family. This man's name, his last name, was Yui. This was the clan that Kurenai Sensei hailed from. However, her grandmother's name, though, that was one that while it wasn't known worldwide, she was known to have strange abilities, strange powers, if you will. She went by an old alias before taking the Yui name, an alias you might be familiar with. As Sakura went to Koronai's home, she would be greeted by none other than the grandmother herself, as Koronai introduced them. The woman's name was Agatha. Agatha Harkness. And she saw great potential in Sakura, for she could sense the power that dwelled within her. And with that, the 1 month training period would begin. Everyone would be preparing and learning new skills, as the final rounds of the Chunin exams were fast approaching. This concludes What If Naruto Was Trained by Dr. Strange? Naruto Mystic Adventures, Part 4. As always, if you enjoyed today's video, then please don't forget to like, comment, subscribe, share, and hit that bell for post notifications so you can stay up to date on everything that is PowerCore Productions and Podcastings that is to come out now and in the future. Stay tuned for next week, as next Monday we're going to be continuing our slated weekly stories, and we'll be getting back into What If Issei Was the Shield Hero, High School DxD, Dragon's Rage, Season 2, Part 2. But anyway, that's going to do it for the end of today's video. I'm Javon Harrington with PowerCore Productions and Podcastings, signing off, and I'll see you next time.